Hi, welcome to my channel where we provide an alternative view to the common narrative. Today I would like to revisit the Ukrainian conflict between Russia and Ukraine and the famous non-event of the counter-offensive. To start off, I would actually like to sketch you a scenario. Now this scenario is not my scenario. It is a scenario basically that has been promoted by the Pro Russian commentators like Colonel McGregor, Douglas McGregor, Scott Rutte, De Duran, and Atlas, Brian Belletic, and so on. And but before I start, it's not that I'm concentrating on I do concentrate on the pro-Russian side because that is what I'm supporting in any case. There is no basically real experts or anybody that I can agree on the pro-Western side. The most famous guy, or the most I wouldn't say well-known guy, but the guy that is being known on the pro-Western side is Michael Kaufman. And I've listened to some of his podcasts, and unfortunately he's as far as I know, he's the director of some other research institute. But you can, from his comments and so on, he's a total academic. He hasn't got a clue what war is about. He knows the theory about that. He knows about what he has studied, but I'm sure he never was involved in any military conflict or military scenario or whatever kind whatsoever. And I've listened to some of them, and that is just pure, basically bullshit. So that's why I don't concentrate. That's why I never mentioned the pro-Western commentators. But then coming back to the pro-Russian commentators, and let's sketch you the scenario according to what they have been promoted for the last 18 months. According to these guys, the Ukrainian army consisted out of, they had different figures. At the end of the day, they said about 700. Then finally the Russian Ministry of Defense came out that at the beginning of the SMO, there were about 195 or 200,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and more or less on the same side, on the Russian side, together with the Donbas militia. So it was more or less an equal forces. But most of these forces, Ukrainian forces, have been trained by NATO over the last, it's now 9 years, but at that stage was about 8 years. And to NATO standards, and they were well trained, and etc. and etc. And we had the Azov battalion, and we had a lot of young radicals that formed the backbone of these army, of the Ukrainian military. And, some middle-aged men as well. According to these commentators, the Ukrainian army was destroyed in the first couple of weeks of the SMO. Most of their equipment was destroyed. Most of the men actually had some huge losses and so on, etc., etc., etc. And then the Ukrainian army had some drafts, and then they got new equipment from the old Soviet countries like Poland, Slovakia, and Estonia, and Latvia, and you know what I'm talking about. So, but these weapons have also been destroyed, and now the second army of the Ukrainian army has been, the second phase, or the second Ukrainian army has been destroyed. And then Zelensky and so on went on a big begging campaign and got a lot of weapons and support from the NATO countries like America and Europe and so on. And at the end of the day, they received a lot of HIMARS, a huge amount of towed artillery, as well as mobile artillery, self-propelled. And, a lot of ammunition, etc., etc., etc. Now, that's supposed to be the third army, but the problem here is that at that stage, the numbers were about 700,000 men in the field of the Ukrainians, which according to them, 400,000 has been killed or out of action or injured and so on. So we are supposed to remain with 300,000 Ukrainian military personnel. That is according to their stories, not mine. And then there were about 80,000 Ukrainian troops constantly being trained in European countries and America for this coming up counteroffensive. And about 80,000 Ukrainian soldiers were earmarked for this counteroffensive. And that's about the scenario, the state that was promoted by the Ukrainian, by these pro-Russian commentators. And now, after this hyped up counteroffensive, which was never a counteroffensive, which was just a lot of couple of skirmishes and so on, and maybe some intense battles and so on, but it was from the start on, it was obvious that they're not going to make it, but I will get to that point right now. And now Putin, well, not only Putin, but the Ministry of Defense have come out with figures, and Putin has confirmed it now at the Valdai speech, that Ukraine has suffered about 80,000 casualties in the last 2-3 months on a counteroffensive, that Russia has destroyed about 557 tanks, that they have destroyed about 1,700 armored vehicles. Did you listen quite well? 575 tanks. 57 tanks. Sorry, that's English. 557 tanks. Now think about this. I thought the army was destroyed. The first army, which had the bulk of the Ukrainian military equipment inherited from the Soviet Union, that was supposed to be destroyed. The Polish have given about, I think, 200 tanks. And Latvia have given a couple of them, Slovakia have given a couple of them, but not 500. But now we have 500,000 men, 500 tanks destroyed. So where did these come from? So where did the 1,700 artillery pieces come from? You know, I challenge these guys, and if you are my viewer and you are subscribed to the channel, ask in the comments, where do they get their numbers from? Because it doesn't make sense. And now we have 80,000 men, according to the Putin and Sogoi, have been, well, killed or injured, wounded. Well, now that's supposed to be the bulk of, that is supposed to be the force that was earmarked for the counteroffensive. So all the trained personnel are now out of action, killed or wounded. So what's left then of the Ukrainian army? Hell, I don't know. But according to these guys' numbers, there should be nobody left. But still, if you look at the battle maps of strategic, what's that guy at YouTube channel? That talks about the battle maps, the daily reports on Telegram channels. Battles are continuing. Ukrainian forces are continuing in the South Zaporizhzhia and as well on Bakhmut as well, for whatever reason. Well, at the end of the day, they want to kill Russians. Whether it has a strategic value or not, that I'm not totally sure about that. But you go there where the enemy is because you fight the enemy, which is sometimes a very stupid strategy, but they are. That's supposed what I think the Ukrainians have. So please, someone should explain to me what happened. Do we have a miracle Ukrainian army that somehow arose out of the dead and reconstructed all the armor and military equipment? Because you Russians are just destroying everything and they just keep popping up, but nobody knows where it comes from. So basically, what I'm trying to say is this is all pure bullshit. I don't think these people really have any clue on what's going on. They try to, like I said, the biggest error anybody can make is to take whatever is said in the West and take it as a fact. It's not a fact. It's a lie. And once you reject the one thing as a lie, you have to reject the other stuff also as a lie. You cannot be selective. If the source is constantly lying and you cannot determine what is true and what is a lie, then you can accept nothing. But for some other reason, that is what they do. And the Russians are also lying. Because I haven't checked out the daily reports, but I think last time I saw it was that they destroyed 400 aircrafts. And they're still destroying them. But Ukraine never had that many aircraft, fighter aircrafts. So where do they all come from? You know, Poland didn't have like 1,000 of them to give. If they gave them 10, 20, maybe 30. But that's about max. And how many countries can give you those type of aircrafts? Not in the hundreds, in the tens. That is where it is. So you cannot make up 400 aircrafts that have never existed in the Ukrainian army. But the Russians are destroying it, and they keep on destroying them. So again, I don't know where this assessment comes from, but there are other things that indicate should indicate something else. Firstly, also, apparently the Ukrainians are running out of manpower. They don't know who to conscript anymore. But then a recent statement made by an American officer said that the Ukrainians should say that the average age of a Ukrainian soldier is 46 years old. And that Ukraine should stop. They understand they want to preserve the youth of Ukraine. So they're not calling up the youth. They are calling actually the older guys up to do the fighting. Because the older guys are more expendable than the young ones. And so he was urging the Ukrainian army to go and call up some of the younger guys. But they did that. They have younger guys. Those are in the Azov battalion. Those are in the more far right, where people volunteer to join these outfits into these radical outlets. And they are the guys that have been trained for the last 8 years by NATO. And they haven't been used that much. Now the question is also why has Ukraine used, why is the average age of a soldier in the Ukrainian army 46? Well, if you have an average of 46, then you have to have a lot of guys about 46 and a lot of guys below 46. Now below 46 mostly would be the radical far-right groups. On the other side, the older guys, why do they use older guys? Okay, older soldiers are usually less fit, less mobile maybe. But think about this. If you are 50 years old, say you are 50 years old, which is not that bad at an age. I'm not sure how the population in terms of health is in Ukraine, so I cannot really state what type of physical capabilities these guys have. But if they are 50, then 30 years back, they were 20. And that was still the Soviet Union. And there was compulsory military training in the Soviet Union. And maybe a lot of these older guys were in the Soviet Union. So they had some training. So they had some background. Maybe not the best. Maybe it was still the Soviet Union type of thing. Yes, technology has changed a lot. Weapon systems has changed a lot. But what do you really require? You require, once you learn to ride a bicycle, you don't unlearn it. Once you fire a rifle, you fire a rifle. If you are comfortable in a uniform, then you are comfortable in a uniform. And if you can dig trenches, know how to fight in a trench war, then that is how you do. And if you operate a mortar, then you operate a mortar. Water hasn't changed. The artillery pieces used by the Ukrainians are still the old Soviet era, because that is what they have inherited from the Soviet Union. So it's nothing funny. It's all familiar to these guys. And maybe that is the reason why we see so many old guys, prisoners, Ukrainian prisoners. Maybe that is why one of the reasons why this American officer pointed out the fact that the average age was 46. Maybe we should think about a reason why that was actually like that. In any case, so let's think about it a bit further. So we have about, say, 400, no, not 400, sorry, maybe 250,000 troops on, Russian troops on the defensive lines. And then we have about 300,000 in the reserve. That was the conscription, the mobilization effort. And then through the Russian Ministry of Defense, they have collected about 350,000 volunteers. Now, I'm sure that not all of these 350,000 volunteers will go to the Ukrainian front. Why? Because Russia and Putin has indicated that they're going to increase their standing army by about 250,000. So I believe bulk of these guys will go to filling those permanent positions. In typical would be like the border of Finland, because Finland is now part of NATO, and etc., etc. So those guys are probably more earmarked for the expansion of the standing force. But maybe 50 or 100,000 volunteers went to the Donbass or to the Ukrainian front. And let's say we have about 300,000 Russian troops, active troops, and 300,000 in the reserve. Right, so on the other side, we have the narrative. The narrative promoted by the Western side and the pro-Russian side, that the Ukrainians have gathered a fort of 80,000 men to lead up to spearhead the counteroffensive. Now, if you do a counteroffensive with 80,000 men, you cannot distribute them over the whole front of 1,000 kilometers or more. You have to pinpoint them. So you have to pinpoint an attack. And the pinpoint attack was supposed to be in the sub-regional area, and then move on to the Azov Sea and cut off Crimea. And nobody actually said anything about the force of 80,000 men. It seems to me that everybody accepted that that would be a sufficient force. But think about this again, that if you have a breachhead and you penetrate these forces right up to the Azov, which will have seriously casualties involved, then anyway, when you reach the Azov Sea, you will maybe have 20,000-30,000 men left. But according to the pro-Russian punters, Ukraine has no soldiers. So who's going to protect the flanks? The northern flank and the southern flank of the spearheaded type of forces. Surely someone, if I'm not a general and I'm not a tactician, but it should be obvious to anybody with a little bit of logic that it was an impossible task. And the Western even should have known it. But the only thing I can actually think about why the Western people had this thought that it might possibly, maybe, I don't know, work, is that of the successes of Ukrainian forces last year, when they went up to Izium and even when they freed Kherson, or when the troops reversed, the Russian troops withdrew from it. That gave them a certain amount of credibility, but I would say in English credibility, that they might be able to do it. And then the narrative in any case started that the Russians are disorganized, the Russians don't know what they're doing, they were repelled from their attack on Kiev. And if you watch one of my previous videos where I actually had a dynamic map of Russian occupations and how that area decreased over time, then you can understand that the Western people will have thought that the Russian army is weak and the Russian army cannot fight and they don't know what they are doing. And it's quite credible to look at the maps and see that. And then also later on, from pro-Russian commentators, people that knew, they admit the Russian command has made mistakes. But they've learned from their mistakes. To what type of degree, I'm still not sure. But one has to really ask, is the Russian army that strong and so trained and so well? Or just does it have an abundance of artillery pieces, which they know well to use? Because at the end of the day, Russian soldiers are also dying. And this ratio of 1 to 10, come on people, that's not on. For a simple reason is because if it was 1 to 10, then the whole Ukraine would have been dead by now. And you cannot hide these statistics. You cannot hide it from populations. Soldiers go on leave. Then they talk to their families. They talk about their friends that have died. When they are in a platoon and he's the only one living, he will tell it to his family and that word will spread. And that is the rumors on social media. In today's social media scenario, that is what will happen. News spreads like wildfire. Yes, cemeteries are getting full in Ukraine. Yes, they are. But 1,000 men being killed spread over 5 or 10 cemeteries will still fill those cemeteries. Because 100 men per cemetery is a hell of a lot of people. And a hell of a lot of graves. And a hell of a lot of space that has to be accommodated. And it's 100 families each. So yes, but it's not the numbers that people are being conveyed. So now, so now we come to the Russian side. So the Russian side said, well, they have now two choices. Well, at this stage they are attacking in the north and Kupiansk and so on. And they are busy there, but if you look at the maps and troop concentrations, they are more in the south, the sub-regional area, both sides, Russia and Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut, which for what reason they are still fighting over. But like I said, we don't always know what is in those minds, the ghost minds. But, so what is the way forward for the Russians? Well, in my opinion, they have to move forward. There is no peace agreement. And like I stated many times, they have to go to the Dnieper River. They have to conquer Odessa and the south, basically the sea base, because there's one single reason for that. They have to reduce Ukraine to a rump state, number one. And number two is there are a lot of Russians, pro-Russians in the Odessa regions and in the north. And a lot of attacks into Russian territory in the Belgorod area is from Kharkov region. So they have to basically conquer that area in order to prevent cross-border attacks by the Ukrainians. So they have to accumulate territory. But now again, this pro-Russian commentators say, no, the Russians cannot do that. They have to have a more mobilization. They have to have more soldiers to keep the area. They need a lot of bigger force. That's Colonel Douglas McGregor and Scott Ritter. But they didn't say the same thing about the counter-offensive forces of 80,000 men by Ukraine. No. That was never discussed as an insufficient force. Yes, the equipment was lacking. Yes. They didn't have enough ammunition. They didn't have air power. They didn't have this, long-range missiles and so on and so on. But they never talked about the size of the 80,000 men. That it's sufficient to have a breachhead and then penetrate up to the Azov. No, that was never discussed. But when it comes to the Russians need at least another 500,000 men just to move the forces up to the Dnieper River. So people, you have to be consistent. You can't talk like this. The point here is, in any case, once the Ukrainian army has seriously been depleted in terms of military equipment and manpower, there's only one thing, and that is they can defend area. And as they will defend, and as they run out of ammunition and military, they have to flee and withdraw forces to Kiev. And then the Russians can move on with, they don't have to attack. they can move forward and occupy the country, because there are a lot of pro-Russians in those areas, in Odessa as well. So do they really need that type of force? But again, why do the Russians need 250,000 men or more to advance and have a counter offensive when they have air superiority, missile superiority, artillery superiority, tank superiority? They have everything in the superior, but they need a lot more men, 3 times what the Ukrainians needed, to do their counter offensives in the sub-region area. Please tell me how that works. I thought these guys were military experts, but they are not. That I can assure you. Anyways, I can talk about this conflict on and on and on. But then we're going to sit the whole day and you have got to listen to a 12-hour video, which nobody is prepared to watch. So I'll address some next issues in another video. But this is what it is for today. So if you want to listen more, if you want to have maybe a more balanced view about stuff, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends, and let's grow it. You know, I said many times, I don't much care about whether people view the channels or not, but it feels nice if you have viewers. So I admit to that. So until next time then, cheers.